with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monamaluwanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Xelena Gonzalez. She is here to celebrate remembering. Before we invite Selena into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Lucas and the Game of Chance, a thrilling middle grade novel by our friend Anthony L. Manna. We love this book. It was named a Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read about 2 years ago. Back in, well, actually more than that, back in 2019. We absolutely love it. We gave it 5 stars. And here's a little bit from our review. Lucas and the Game of Chance is enthralling enough to read in one afternoon. The characters are fun, the setting is vivid, and the adventure the character embarks on is full of surprises and action. We loved that there is an element of mystery to the story, and that the main character finds magical characters along the way which may help him in his quest, and they may not. Like all great fantasy novels, this is an exploration of good and evil, and it will be nice to witness the growth of the main character as the story continues. An enjoyable read which middle grade readers will love, and young at hearts adults will love too. You can read our entire review of Lucas and the Game of Chance on our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the blog button at the top of the page, or you can just put in Lucas Certified Great Read in our little search tool. Get your copy today. Lucas and the Game of Chance, a Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, written by Anthony L. Manna. Join us right now from the San Antonio area in the great state of Texas. Our guest is here today to celebrate her very powerful picture book. It's called Remembering. Please welcome to the show, Xelena Gonzalez. Selena, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jed. Thank you for having me on your show.
I'm delighted to have you on the show. I have a feeling this is going to be a really important conversation. Tell us about Remembering, please. Who will we be remembering?
So remembering in the picture book, we're looking at a family, and particularly a child who is experiencing the loss of their pet, and more specifically, the first, in my mind at least, the first Day of the Dead without their pet. So, at least that's how I wrote it in mine. So Day of the Dead, for those who are not familiar, is a 2-day celebration, and sometimes it goes beyond that. It's quite festive, at least here in San Antonio, where I live. But usually the first day is reserved for what we call the innocents, Dia de los Inocentes. Some people call it Dia de los Angelitos, so that translates to Day of the Angels, Day of the Innocents. And so that first day is usually reserved for, sadly, children who have passed on, or babies, or pets, because they're also considered these innocents, these pure spirits. And so, so in the book, the child and their family is setting up what we call an ofrenda, or an offering, to welcome back the spirit of their departed pet.
Beautiful. You know, I think we've talked about loss here a lot on the podcast, which is really wonderful because, as I said in the podcast many times in the past, when I was growing up, we kind of didn't talk about loss. You know, it wasn't something you never went to a funeral, and if a dog or a pet passed away, very oftentimes, unless you actually found the pet, you were told that the pet went to live on a farm with
Right.
a million other pets. It's the biggest farm in the world. But we didn't talk about it, at least in Boston in our Irish Catholic neighborhood. And I think that was a disservice because we all, we might have been naive, but at some point we all knew that, our pet's probably not at a farm. And that person that was in our lives who's no longer here and nobody talks about it anymore, they probably died. And we didn't have a chance to kind of grieve and go through the process and celebrate the friendship and the love that we had with others.
Yeah, you hit upon a word that's really an important one, and that's celebrate, right? So a big part of the holiday tradition is a celebration. So of course, there's going to be sadness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I've seen people pay homage through what we call the altars or the offerings, through poetry, through music. And so of course there's tears sometimes, but it's also meant to be a celebration, and also this recognition that we will all follow that path and that death is a part of life. It's a part of the same cycle, and that we're also celebrating the days that we have living, while we're still alive. And I've always enjoyed the holidays. I didn't realize as a child, of course, that this was not celebrated everywhere. It wasn't until I went away for college that I realized at that time how unheard of it was in certain parts. Now, of course, with the movie Coco and other pop culture references or things that we're able to reference, it's become a little bit more popular. But I have always felt starting in young adulthood, that is one of the greatest cultural contributions that our people have, our people being Mexican American, but also beyond in Latin America, what I consider indigenous practices. And I know a lot of other cultures have their own way of honoring and recognizing the dead, but this particular way that is so festive and colorful and specific, and I think growing in popularity in some ways, it's such an important contribution to the world, really. I think because we are human, because we will all experience loss, because we will all die one day. And when I look at how far we have to, I guess, evolve as a species, if you will, that comfort, that acknowledgement of death is so healthy and important, because I feel like a lot of our issues stem from this like fear of death and loss of control that we really don't have, and so I think it's an important aspect of the culture. And because death of a pet is quite often the first really significant death that a child might experience, it's an important book in that sense, in ways that are both beautiful and celebratory, and also like somber and taking that moment to recognize and honor that bond that has changed shape.
Yeah. I'm happy now that we seem as a culture, as a society, able to say to kids, it's okay to be sad. Yes, you lost your best friend. It makes sense that you're sad. It was the 80s, and I went through a period in my life where we lost, I think there was 4 people within a month. And a couple of those people were kids that I was working with at the school I was working with. And so for the the first and only time, I went to see a counselor, and the reaction from the counselor was, well, you're sad. You're supposed to be sad. Get over it. And I'm like,
oh my gosh,
kind of not what I was expecting from you. Thanks very much. And, but I think we're at a point we've grown to say, yeah, that it does hurt, and it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to be sad for this time. But it's also important to celebrate the love and the friendship that you had with that person.
Mm-hmm. And the bonds that we continue to share, in life, because sometimes we don't realize how precious this life is until we have that really full recognition and understanding of the ephemeral nature of it all, right? And it's funny what you're sharing, like even recently, well, with the publication of our first book, All Around Us, there is a very light reference to death. I think for the littles, they can recognize, there's a grandfather and a child who are looking at the circles around them. And so after the littles read that book, they literally want to find all the circles around them. But there is this light reference to the life and death connection as part of this bigger circle. And so older readers will get that, right? And when I say older, it's really just up to, the families, mm-hmm. what somebody's ready to talk about. That's what I love about the books that I've created with Adriana. But I want to paint this picture of this moment that I had in a library. I want to say that it was Albuquerque. And I'm in this library. This is pre-pandemic. It was 2018. And there's these kids just packed into a library. And there was this one kid. She was very precocious, but I want to say she was about fourth grade. And it was during the Q&A. And she said, why do you write about death? Right? She asked me that. And she kind of did it with raised eyebrows because it's not over the top. It's not over your head in that first book. And she said, I'm wondering why you write about death. And I said, well, okay, let's talk about it. Right? And they're sitting crisscross applesauce, right? And it's like this sea of kids just moved towards the shore. They all just leaned in. And so many of them, Jed, they like looked back over their shoulders and they're looking back at the teachers and the librarian standing in the back of the room. And that moment, that body language told me so much. It told me that these children wanted to talk about it. Mm-hmm. They were leaning in towards an adult who didn't flinch, who was ready to, of course in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I handle this in a delicate way? Right. And so, but it also told me not the gatekeepers, I shouldn't say that. The adults that are charged with taking care of them weren't comfortable talking with them about it. And I get it. Like, you have to be careful if you're a librarian or a teacher. But just the way they all moved, it told me that maybe even some of their parents, and it's not easy for any of us, right? But the way they moved in and the way they were ready to like, what is she going to say? And I did say some form of like, well, because we're all going to die. Now, maybe that sparked conversations at home that some parents might not have been ready for, but that's the whole idea behind this book and about Day of the Dead, that it's a little bit more accessible. There's ways to confront it, to have those important conversations, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it and how that helps. I've already heard a little bit of early like, oh, we just lost our cat. This is a really beautiful way of engaging in these conversations and things of the sort.
It's interesting about first off, congratulations. I know that feeling being in front of a lot of kids and getting a question. And first off, having the poise to sit there and going, yes, I know how to answer this question, while your mind is going, what am I going to say?
Right.
But, when my kids were young, and I don't remember how old, but they were fairly young, to the point where when people heard that I had done this, were very upset with me. But told my kids, yes, we're all going to die at some point. I'm going to die. Hopefully you'll be burying me. That's the way it's supposed to be. And people are like, oh, it's too young there, and I'm like, well, what's the proper age? And it's like, well, and they didn't have an answer. And it's like, to me, it was like, we're not focusing on it. We're not macabre. It's just like, hey, this is part of life. And, and it's something that we need to talk about and be ready to deal with. And my kids, I think, have a very healthy appreciation of life and relationships. And they seem to have come through it pretty well, despite my mistakes that I made parenting.
I don't know. I think you did all right. And maybe that's me also wanting to pat myself on the back because my daughter, Yamaya, she already knows. That's like any little child-parent talk that we have, and she's now 17, so she's been hearing them for years. It always ends with, we're all going to die. Mm-hmm. And I'll just have her fill in the blank. I'll say, well, baby, you know what I have to say at the end of the day. And she'll say, I know, we're all going to die. And the conversations aren't always about death. Sometimes it's about like fear and anxiety. And it's like, my talks always do end with that, and it's how I have to talk to myself too, because it's like, yes, we can be afraid of this, that, or the other. We can worry endlessly about any number of things, but at the end of the day, we have this finite life. Show up, do your best day by day, and that's all we can do is do what we came to do. And sometimes we don't know what we're here to do, but we try every day, and we can't get so caught up in the mental stuff. And so, because I've had people ask me, like, they'll say, like, sometimes in a joking way, sometimes in a serious way, like, why are your people so obsessed with death? And I'm like, I don't think they're obsessed with death. Mm-hmm. I just think that there is what I consider, again, a very healthy understanding of that, but it comes with that, that joy for life, that recognition. And so, and I think that the book, beautifully displays that there is some sadness. They're remembering the pet. The pet is popping out of the photos in this book, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so larger than life. And, but the family is coming together, and they're making a path of petals, and they're lighting the candles. And I think the more festive elements of Day of the Dead aren't exactly pictured. This is more like a moment, like an action, the ritual. And Adriana did a beautiful job in illustrating all of that. But yeah, it's, I don't want to say closure, but that recognition. And I like the word too, remembering. It was initially called, the working title of my manuscript was called Inocentes, like innocence, because that's the name of the holiday tradition that, as I learned it. And I remember thinking, like, remembering, like, is that too simple? But I've always liked that word, any R-E word, this is me getting all word nerd, right? But like remembering, like bringing the members of the family back together, bringing the parts of ourselves back together, and really just like feeling that wholeness once again. Mm-hmm. So that for me is what it's about.
Yeah. One of the things that folks in my family and the folks that I grew up with always joke about is, anytime we're at a wake or a funeral, it's like, oh yeah, I haven't seen you since the last wake or the funeral. And it's, and in some ways it's true. And we've been trying really hard to get everybody over to celebrate being alive. But I think that is one thing about our celebrations and customs, is that we do on those moments when we lose somebody, we do come together as a family. We do see people that we haven't seen for so long, coming together to help us remember.
Yeah. It's a really nice, I don't know. I'm interested in those traditions and how we express them around the world, because I've been, thinking about like how to present this book to our youth, specifically, although I do very much believe that picture books are for all ages. Mm-hmm. A lot of the work that I do involves visiting the schools, and we're very fortunate to be able to do that again after so long not being able to. So give yourself some grace also with like the family reunions too, because I think we're all figuring that out. But, compared to our first two books and like the music and movement that I would add to those programs, I'm like, wow, like, I don't want to just go in there and make kids cry, right? Because they do, like in some of the early readings, it's hard for some of them. So I've been really struggling with like, okay, well, what is that balm that I'm going to put? Like, what else is it that I'm going to offer? And one of the things I've thought about is that, just showing different, sharing with them different traditions that I've seen and that I want to research as well, how other cultures deal with death. And so yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and it's going to get more exciting as I get to share with the young readers. Cause that's the other half of the process, right? Is reading to your kids, reading it yourself, finishing that conversation or continuing that conversation. So I'm excited about that part to come.
Yeah. I'm imagining, and I'm thinking back a couple of decades now to when I was reading with my kids, and there were a number of books that would help me remember people who I had lost. And there are a number of books that it was very hard for me to get through. And I'm imagining that remembering might be hard for some families to get through. And I say that not to scare somebody away from reading, remembering. I say it to challenge you and excite you to do it, because I know that those moments when I would tear up and choke up when I was reading a certain book with my kids actually brought us closer together, because it gave me a chance to talk about those people and to and so we weren't talking about the subject of grief or loss or, celebrating the people in our lives who are no longer with us. It wasn't just on that moment when we're so upset and sad. It is just, again, a part of everyday life. And it's like, oh, this reminds me of my grandmother, and she was great. And I missed her a whole lot, but I remember doing this and that with her, and that was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that you bring up an important point, because that's something that I've been in the, there's like this excitement building up and people wanting me to do these appearances and readings. And I've felt that it's, as much as I love the book, as important as I think it is, it's important for me to tell them, like, hey, I'm doing the majority of my appearances so far around Day of the Dead. And the schools that are asking me to come, I'm like, have you looked at the digital galley? Are you, prepared? Because I want people to go into it knowing that that's a conversation they're ready to have. I want to honor those parents and their families and their own traditions, and when they're ready to have those conversations, even though, we don't know when our pets are going to die. We don't know when our human loved ones are going to die. So as much as we want to hold off, these conversations do have to happen eventually, but I want to be as careful as I can around those. Now, what I think is really special and beautiful about the book is that it's not just a story. You are seeing illustrated this ritual that not just this family is having, but that you can have too, right? Like there is, I'm a big fan I'm a librarian as well, or I've served as a librarian for several years in the past. And so I like offering resources. I like the long letter to readers, because again, to me, readers are any age. And so Adriana offers a substantial letter. I do as well, which includes an invitation to build your own ofrenda, to practice this custom in a way that feels good for you, if it feels good for you. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very simple expression of like, hey, look, all of the elements are represented on these altars or on these offerings, because it is a native tradition, and that's the one thing that we know is quite common in, various parts of like Mexico and Latin America, that we have water, we have food, we have fire, we have smoke, we have, and so just like this is as simple as it can be. This is the flour that was traditionally used. Like you can do these things. And it's funny in early conversations that we've been having, a couple of people have told me, even if you don't celebrate that particular custom, like those little offering spaces, or let's say like altar spaces are already sort of naturally occurring, where it's like, there's, let's say for a human, right? Like the little funeral card and their photos, and everybody just sort of honors that spot. Like it started with flowers and it just sort of stays that way. But yeah, it's I like that the back pages are there. I like being able to welcome people to share in this tradition. I had a couple of people in prior years say, like friends who I have of other cultures say like, hey, is this cultural appropriation if we do this in my home? And I'm like, well, I can't speak for every brown person, but for me, I think it's like we've shared in our conversation, like, I think it's a beautiful tradition. It's a human thing that we're talking about here. And so I welcome it. And, I talk about that in the back of the book, that in different parts of Mexico and Latin America, it's celebrated in slightly different ways. This is what I know to be true. And this is what I feel is worth sharing and valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like to think of cultural appreciation and respect.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things that I noticed on your website, in your bio, the first sentence talks about you being somebody who practices the healing arts through writing and movement. Why are the healing arts so important to you?
Well, for me, it's something that I feel I inherited, I guess is the word. My great grandmother was a curandera and a partera, or as we would say, a healer and midwife. And so she delivered all of the babies in the village and the animal babies and cured with herbs and sometimes incense. A lot of like native traditions went into this. So very different from what we call Western medicine now. But she was very well respected and loved, and she died the week I was born, and I didn't know. I'm fascinated with her life and her stories, and I'm like, how did we not write down all the recipes and all of the ways? And I have this big family, and they're all just like, oh, I don't know. It just wasn't done, but I feel that pull to work in those ways, and I do feel like my gift of words and of dance and movement is the way that I'm able to work in that area. Because I do think well, we all know this, right? We've all read a piece of literature or a poem that touches us and it moves us in such a way that we're able to, understand something in a better way that eases our hearts or our minds. And so, although I didn't realize at first that this is what I was doing, I believe that now. I had I've never really shared this, but I had this dream, and it was funny because it was a podcast. Now I'm feeling this like deja vu sense, but I was waking up, Jed, and I was waking up from this dream where I was talking to someone on a radio interview. Maybe it was a podcast, but it's an interview, and they asked me something about my picture books. And I said, well, they're not so much picture books as they are prayers. And then I woke up and I thought, that's weird, right? And I started writing in my dream journal because I always do. And I thought that's such a strange thing to say. Now in waking life, I often say, well, they're not children's books, they're picture books. Like I like to make that distinction, right? As a reader, as a parent, as a librarian. But I thought it was odd in this dream that I was clarifying, well, they're not picture books so much as they are prayers. And in my dream journaling, I thought like, well, are they like if they're prayers, like what is the prayer, right? And I say that word in a very global sense, like you can, I don't know. I feel like prayer is meditation. It's good vibes. It's good wishes. It's whatever you want to call it. I don't want people to get tripped up on the semantics depending on their belief systems. But in really thinking about that, like, well, what is the prayer? What is the wish for the people opening this up? And thinking about the common thread, and not just my picture books, but my writing for older readers. And it's that you see the beauty in yourself, that you honor the life that you have, that you feel connected and strong, and that you see in the same way that we see it in a tree or in a rock. Like our books have a lot of connection to nature and the elements, and that it's like we look at some of the devastation that our planet is enduring right now. And I really think that if we see ourselves as a part of it, an inextricable part of it, and learning to like love ourselves and treat ourselves better, that we can also learn to treat our planet better in that way. I don't know if those are the right words, but I remember that was some of the mind flow, from that morning. And so I feel like, for what it's worth, those are my little bits of medicine that I like to put out into the world. And with movement, when I'm able to add movement, when I work with the kids, like we did a Tai Chi retelling with my first story. We did Dancing the Elements with the second story. I have this whole other thing planned for book 3, that involves, that like movement and also like putting that balm on our heart. Because I've seen as a children's librarian in the past how, kids would come up to me years later, years after I'd gone to their school, or they'd come to the library and they'd say, Miss Sally, remember the story about and they'd chomp their arms, like to show like the crocodile, or they'd say, remember that story about Celia Cruz? And they'd do this little salsa step. And so I saw how that memory triggered things for them, and how inhabiting story, actually being able to physically move through a story, changed things for them, and it made it more profound, and it stuck with them. And so with these stories, where again I feel like there is that honoring of their own little spirits, and how strong and resilient and beautiful we really are, little kids or us big kids, right? Like that when we move through it, it shifts us. And I've felt that. I've felt that shift in a room and in an auditorium. And so I know that the work is good, and I know that the medicine is good. It's not, the herbs and prayers that my great grandmother had done, but I do feel like it's in the same vein of just treating ourselves in a better way.
Well, I love that thought and that image that your picture books are prayers. And I certainly can celebrate that. And I'm happy that you shared that with us.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me riff.
Oh, no, we love. That's where the most interesting parts of conversations come from.
Yeah, now I'm wondering if this really is a deja vu moment. I'm like, maybe that was Jed in my dream that I was talking to.
Well, we should probably ask you where we can go to find out more about remembering and all of your great books before the riff gets too weird and metaphysical.
Before it becomes another podcast. So you can get Remembering wherever books are sold. It is officially released August 29th, so the end of this month. I encourage readers to get books wherever they can. Wherever they want to. So it's wherever books are sold. I have I'm not sure when this is airing, but I have a current pre-order campaign with a local independent bookstore in San Antonio. The name is the Twig Bookshop. And so you get a little art print if you order through them, and we'll sign the book, but you can really get them anywhere. And if you do not want to buy it or you cannot buy it, really encourage your local libraries to carry it. I'm a public librarian for life. And so order it through your library as well if you'd like to. But it's through Simon and Schuster. I believe books can be bought there as well.
We've had a really fun time speaking to the author of Remembering, Xelena Gonzalez. Selena, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. It's been a nice way to start my day.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Celia Riker. She'll be here to celebrate Augusta. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we'll start by thanking our guest, Xelena Gonzalez. Please be sure to check out Remembering. Also want to thank our sponsor, Lucas in the Game of Chance, a thrilling middle grade read. It's also a Reading with Your Kids certified grade read, written by Anthony L. Mena. Want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Ann O'Leary, Monica Rivera, Sosa, Soji, Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.